peace with our neighbors, despite the bloody things they did to us in the past. The country's nascent organized criminal groups exploited corruption in Albania. While the communist secret police did not give birth to the Albanian mafia, some former Sigurimi, and, following the collapse of communism, former and current police officers like Arban, saw opportunities to make large sums of money in organized crime. Arban says that while there are similarities between Albanian crime families and the more famous Italian mafia-type clans, there's a fundamental difference. There's a kind of equality among Albanians. It's hard to have the hierarchy that the Italians do. Violence is definitely a key component, but I would say also there's an honesty in the way we do business. There's a scene in The Godfather in which Marlon Brando's character, Vito Corleone, takes a seat at a large dining table with the other heads of the crime families of New York and New Jersey. "How did things ever get so far?" he says in an effortless, gravelly whisper. "I don't know. It was so unfortunate, so unnecessary. I swear on the souls of my grandchildren," he concludes, "that I will not be the one to break the peace that we have made here today." The scene in the movie takes place in 1948, but 7 years later, Corleone's son and heir Michael exacts revenge, having 4 mob bosses summarily executed and thus consolidating his family's power. It's very hard to think that an Albanian would do the same after promising peace, Arban says. Honesty. What at first may sound like an attempt to romanticize the world of organized crime bears much closer scrutiny, for honesty may hold the key to the outsized success of Albanian organized crime internationally. Besa is a term used frequently in Albania, usually translated into English as faith or trust. A more accurate interpretation is to keep the honor. The word has been around since at least the 15th century, when it appeared in the Kanun, a set of traditional Albanian major threat to the Western world because of their extreme levels of violence, secrecy, and the fact that they had graduated from acting as drug mules and hit men to working within the highest echelons of international organized crime. According to the United Nations, today there are about 1.2 million Albanians living abroad, equivalent to almost half of the population currently living in Albania. Albanian organized crime groups are global players in drug trafficking, arms, cybercrime, and money laundering. In 2004, the Albanian Rudaj organization was labeled the 6th crime family in New York City, joining the 5 traditional Italian-American mafia families, the Genovese, Gambino, Bonanno, Colombo, and Lucchese. It was named after Alex Rudaj, who immigrated to the U.S. in the 1980s and started the organization in the early 1990s, had ties to the Gambinos, and was sentenced to 27 years in prison on racketeering and other charges in 2006. In 2019, the UK's Guardian newspaper reported how the Albanian mafia had seized control of the country's £5 billion, $6.3 billion US dollar cocaine trade. For years, it said, there was a separation in the cocaine trade between importers, wholesalers, and the gangs who distributed it on the street. The Albanians ditched the entire model. They began negotiating directly with the Colombian cartels who control coca production. Huge shipments were arranged direct from South America. Supply chains were kept in-house. The Albanians lowered the price of cocaine and increased its purity. John Elite reckons that the Albanians are more and more respected in the American underworld because they're hungry and they never betray one another. As a former Gambino crime family associate, Elite was once a hitman for John Gotti Jr. He later turned against the powerful Italian-American crime organization when he says they betrayed him. But because Elite's parents are both Albanian, his father was born in Albania, his mother in the United States, he was never formally allowed to become a made man in the American mafia. Today, he's a motivational speaker, writer, and host of the Johnny and Gene Show podcast, which discusses the mafia's past, present, and future. Today, the Italian mafia has become complacent, he tells Stranger's Guide. Yes, they're in the stock markets, the unions, and seaports, but they're making room for the Albanians because they have no choice. It's either that or there's violence. The Albanian mob isn't particularly sizable, he says, but that's not the point. The Italians are losing their respect because there's no violence. And without that, and without the structure, you'll lose your place on the street. With the Albanians, it's the quality, not quantity, Elite says. I'd rather be with 20 men than 1,000 cowards. And even if we lose, we're coming back, and you're going to have to put us down for good if we're going to stop. Think of it like a soccer team. If you have AF,